Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akredoluale, the headlines. Western allies seek more security at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns of potential Independence Day attacks. And Kyiv denies responsibility for the killing of Darya, daughter of close ally of Russia's President Vladimir Putin, outside Moscow. We begin tonight, this morning rather, with news that Russia has claimed that it has destroyed an ammunition depot in southern Ukraine's Odessa region, while Ukraine claims to have repelled Russia's Donetsk offensive from multiple directions. With high-precision, sea-based, long-range caliber missiles near the village of Myrovske in Odessa region, Russian Defense Minister Konashenkov announced over the weekend that the Russian armed forces destroyed an ammunition depot with missiles for the American HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems and Western-made anti-aircraft systems. In Zaporizhzhia region, the Russian Air Force claims to have destroyed a fuel depot of Ukraine's 102nd Territorial Defense Brigade. The Russian military is also said to have destroyed 2 American M77 howitzers in combat positions near Kanayetska in Kherson. Meanwhile, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reports that the army there had repelled a Russian offensive in Slavyansk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and other locations in Donetsk. In southern Ukraine, the Russian troops are gathering in the direction of Nikolaev and Kherson. According to Ukraine's Navy, the Russian army has strengthened its military presence in the Black Sea, where 5 Russian warships armed with 36 caliber cruise missiles are on combat duty. Meanwhile, Russia has continued its assault on eastern and southern regions in Ukraine. That's according to Ukrainian officials. Ukraine's General Staff said in its daily update that Russian forces had inflicted damage from artillery and multiple rocket launcher systems in the areas of Solidar, Sayevse, and Berivka settlements in the eastern Bakhmut region. The governor of the Dnipropetrovsk region said on Telegram that Nikopol, which lies across the Dnipro River from the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, had been shelled on 5 different occasions overnight, causing a large fire at an industrial premises and cutting power to 3,000 inhabitants. The governor also reported that the southern city of Mykolaiv was hit by multiple S-300 missiles. And Britain, France, Germany, and the United States have stressed the need to ensure the safety of nuclear installations threatened by the conflict in Ukraine. In a phone call, the 4 leaders also reiterated their support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion. Moscow and Kyiv have accused each other of shelling the Russian-held nuclear power plant, raising fears of a possible catastrophe. The conflict was the subject of a conference call yesterday, bringing together the UK's Boris Johnson, US President Joe Biden, his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Following its conclusion, they urged military restraint around the Zaporizhzhia power plant in southern Ukraine, where renewed fighting has led to fears of disaster worse than that in Chernobyl in 1986. Let's turn our attention to the threat at the power plant itself. Russia accuses Ukrainian forces of another shelling on the plant, while Ukraine said that the Russian attack on the city of Voznesensk could have targeted southern Ukraine's power plants. Ukraine reportedly launched an artillery strike using Western long-range weapons at that plant from across the Dnipro River on Saturday night. The shells exploded in front of an administrative building, causing no damage to key facilities at the plant. Work is underway to check if there are any casualties. There's been no response from Ukraine to the accusation. Zaporizhzhia, one of Europe's largest nuclear power plants, has been controlled by Russian forces since early March, but the Ukrainian staff have continued to operate it. The shelling of the facility, on which both sides have exchanged accusations for weeks, has raised concerns over its security among the international community. And authorities in Ukraine's Nikopol have been preparing for emergency situations since the city lies across the Dnipro River from the power plant being discussed. where intensified shelling has sparked fears and fueled concerns. In Nikopol itself, cleanup crews have been working to sweep the streets and clear away the debris left over from the shelling in recent weeks. Electricians were rewiring the neighborhoods and residents were grappling with the situation of damaged homes. Russia and Ukraine blamed each other for the possible danger that is, with daily shelling and growing alarm about what could happen at the facility. Nikopol officials are gearing up for a worst-case scenario. Emergency mobile radiation monitoring trucks have been deployed around the city to measure radiation levels if there's a suspected leak. Let's look at how it all started in Zaporizhzhia. Russian forces have occupied the site since early March. Its management is told it now belongs to Russian state nuclear power company Rosatom. Ukrainian staff continue to operate the plant, however. They have been urged to hand control back because of the dangers, and some staff there have said they are being kept at gunpoint. Russian forces reportedly deployed rocket launchers in the complex, turning it into a military base. And the International Atomic Energy Agency says the plant is completely out of control and needs both inspection and repairs. Officials say the plant could be cut off from power as Moscow tries to redirect electricity to Crimea, which it annexed 8 years ago. Russia is accused of basing about 500 soldiers there. Recent footage shows military vehicles being driven inside, and there's no doubt, according to some, that it's been used as a base.
I remain gravely concerned about the unfolding situation in and around Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia. Common sense must prevail to avoid any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety or security of the nuclear plant, and the facility must not be used as part of any military operation. Instead, agreement is urgently needed to reestablish Zaporizhzhia as purely civilian infrastructure and to ensure the safety of the area.
Let's talk now to Christian Arinze, senior engineer and nuclear security and non-proliferation expert at the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Agency, the NNRA. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. He joins us virtually from Enugu. Good morning to you, Mr. Arinze.
Good morning.
Let's look at this power plant and why there's so much concern about it. What could you tell us about what is in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the possible threat that it could pose if there's a problem there?
Thank you. Well, actually, it's very disturbing and disconcerting with developments that are currently evolving at that location. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is currently in a serious position as the continuous shelling exposes the facility to risks of radiation leak and possible radiological contamination. To start with, as a context, since the 2014 occupation of Crimea, that's the Donbas region in southeast of Ukraine, the escalation of that conflict actually started with Russian occupation of the Chernobyl nuclear plant in the northern part of Ukraine, which they later moved their forces out of that nuclear plant and then captured the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in March. Nuclear power plants actually are built with a lot of careful consideration to safety, security, and safeguards consideration because the risks are increasing. And today, in contemporary discussion, we are talking about security by design, safety by design, and even safeguards by design. And the risk that nuclear power plant is exposed to is not only with regards to safety concerns, but as well as security, safeguards, and cyber concerns. The plant actually, the risks that it currently faces include loss of on-site and off-site power supply, as we can see with the shelling, which normally takes the electricity supply to the plant off, and they have to shut down reactor of 6, 5, and 4. So only 3 reactors are currently functional at that nuclear power plant. The loss of that power, what it can do is that it will compromise the cooling system of the reactor, which is very critical to keeping the reaction contained and then preventing reactor core meltdown. That is why in nuclear facilities, they are not the security and safety consideration that is put into it is built around what is called the design basis threat. So at the moment, the shellings actually takes a layer that is what I mean by the design defense in depth is that the security measures are built in layers. If you can see the containment building there, which is at the heart of the reactor, at the center of it is the fuel matrix, which is level 1, which is deep inside the containment building. Level 2 has to do with the reactor control boundary. And then level 3 is the physical containment structure, which is about 1.2 to 2.0 meters thick. So you can see that it can withstand any kind of shelling. But currently, with the continuous and sustained pressure that the people, processes, and the physical structure is subjected to, it takes away a layer of the security measure and then exposes the facility to a lot of vulnerabilities, such as radiation leak, and then as well as the risk of destroying the spent fuel pond radiation monitors. As we know, 3 radiation monitors have been destroyed as a result of the shelling. So these are very serious issues because that water is highly radioactive, and the shelling can actually lead to radiological consequences within the vicinity of Zaporizhia. Thank you.
There is, of course, I'm happy now that we can actually see visuals of the plant and some of the items that you're mentioning. If we can go back to those visuals and see more of them, so that as we speak, our guests can, our audience can actually see what it is that you're talking about in terms of the radiation levels, in terms of the equipment and all that. The question is, we have seen this before. We have seen some of this before, and in the case of Chernobyl in 1986, that was a very serious accident. But more recently, we have seen this in Fukushima, Japan, as a result of what one would describe as nature's fury. So it's not like we don't have any experience about what could happen if you have a nuclear accident. Now, in both Fukushima and Chernobyl, they had to evacuate those who lived in the whereabouts of or the nearby neighborhoods of the plant. And indeed, in the case of Fukushima and even Chernobyl, certain parts of both are still uninhabitable right now. So is this an option in the case of Zaporizhia? Should those who live within its vicinity or along the line of a possible leak be evacuated before that actually happens?
Thank you. Before answering that question, I would like to actually give a context. You know, it's very the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi actually addressed the United Nations Security Council on August 5th, where he emphasized the strict adherence to the 7 pillars of nuclear security and safety, which include the physical integrity of the plant, which whether it's the reactors, the fuel ponds, or radioactive waste stores. All safety and security systems and equipment must be fully functional at all times. The operating staff must be able to fulfill their safety and security duties and have the capacity to make decisions free of undue pressure, as well as there must be reliable communication system for the operator, that is Energoatom, to communicate with the regulator and others. And there must be effective on-site and off-site radiation monitoring, which we know has been compromised in the case of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And then there must be uninterrupted logistical supply chains and transportation to and fro the sites, which we know have been compromised. If we look at the situation currently, the off-site power, the shelling have taken off some off-site power to that nuclear plant. And this is a very critical problem because taking off off-site power and then in a scenario where we have loss of on-site power and as well as the backup power supply through the diesel power generators. And in a war situation, you cannot resupply. The supply chain will be disrupted for the diesel. And then you find out that what will happen is loss of coolant, and then which will lead to reactor core meltdown. Back to your question, there's what we call beyond the design basis accident. The case of Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi are beyond design basis accidents in the sense that those accidents were not actually besieged or rather captured by the design basis threat. Take, for instance, the case of Chernobyl. It was a safety test that went wrong. And then the lesson learned from that accident led to the building of the setting up of the containment structure within the nuclear power plant so as to safely keep the reactor where the critical self-sustaining reaction goes on, and then to cool the system. The distinguishing factor between Zaporizhia and Chernobyl and Fukushima is that in the case of Chernobyl, it uses the type of light water reactors that we call boiling water reactors, and as well as Fukushima too, it uses General Electric and Toshiba and Toshiba manufactured boiling water reactors. The tsunami induced actually a sort of a loss of on-site and off-site power in Fukushima, which led to reactor core meltdown. In the case of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, such kind of beyond design basis accidents are likely because the continuous shelling may lead, even though the reactor containment building can withstand shellings and ultimately, but there is a level to which the stress it is subjected to can break the defensive barriers and then lead to significant radiological consequences. So in the case of, in terms of accidents occurring at Zaporizhia, that is certain if the shelling is sustained.
Indeed, one will hope that those who are in the decision-making positions here take quick action to prevent all of this, as you have outlined it. Mr. Christian Arinze, Senior Engineer and Nuclear Security and Non-Proliferation Expert at the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. Thank you for your time this morning and for your perspective on the issue. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When we return, UN Security Council praises the ongoing Ukraine-Russia grain deal as ships dock and implementation continues. Details in a moment. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Russian Defense Ministry says several Russian soldiers involved in the military operation in Ukraine have been hospitalized with severe chemical poisoning. Traces of botulinum toxin type B, which is an organic poison of artificial origin, have been discovered in samples taken from the servicemen, according to the ministry, accusing Kyiv of chemical terrorism. The statement says the Russian troops were hospitalized with signs of severe poisoning after being stationed near the village of Vasilyeva in Zaporizhia on July the 31st. Moscow plans to send laboratory tests from the soldiers to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. Botulinum toxin, often called the miracle, is one of the most toxic biological substances known to science. Produced by the Clostridium botulinum bacteria, It blocks the release of the acetylcholine neurotransmitter causing muscle paralysis. Botulinum toxin type A has been used in medicine in small doses in recent decades, especially to treat disorders. And President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked Ukrainians to be vigilant ahead of the Independence Day celebrations. In his weekend address, he said Russia could try to do something particularly disgusting, particularly cruel, as one of the key objectives of the enemy is to humiliate us, adding that Ukraine has to be strong enough to resist all provocation. Ukraine's Independence Day is on Wednesday, the 24th of August, and will also mark 6 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. A criminal case has been launched over the death of the daughter of prominent Russian philosopher and political commentator Alexander Dugin. The investigative committee announced this, adding that a car bomb is suspected as the cause of her death. The 29-year-old has been officially confirmed as the victim of the explosion outside the Russian capital. According to investigators, a blast ripped through her Toyota Land Cruiser at around 9 p.m. on Saturday as she was driving near the village of Bolshe-Vasyemi in Moscow's region. It is thought an explosive device detonated inside the vehicle, which then caught fire. A journalist and commentator, Dugina was the daughter of philosopher Alexander Dugin, who is often painted in the West as the ideologist of President Vladimir Putin's foreign policy over the past decade. However, in Russia, Dugin is viewed as a relatively marginal figure due to his often extreme anti-Western and neo-Eurasian views. The 60-year-old has never been officially endorsed by the Kremlin. Meanwhile, Kyiv has denied responsibility for the attack, saying it has nothing to do with the assassination of Darya Dugina, the daughter of the Russian political commentator and philosopher Alexander Dugin. Speaking on national television, an aide to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, Mikhail Podolyak, said that his country is not a, quote, terrorist state, an apparent response to suspicions voiced by officials that Kyiv might be behind the bombing. He says, quote, I want to stress out that Ukraine, of course, has nothing to do with this because we are not a criminal state, unlike Russia, and especially not a terrorist state. Mr. Podolyak also indicated that the killing of Dugin's daughter is, quote, a testament to the ongoing struggle for power and influence amongst various groups in Russia. We'll take a break at this point, and when we return, we'll have David Otto, security expert, with us to update us on all the perspectives from the ongoing war in Ukraine. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. International security expert David Otto joins us now from the British capital, London. Good morning to you, David. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Good morning.
Let's take a look at this. Put the conflict to one side. Let's put the conflict to one side and take a look at some of the consequences, if you like. It does appear as if both sides, and I mean Ukrainian forces and Russian forces, are trying to get mileage out of this Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Unfortunately, if there is a problem, both Russia and Ukraine and possibly other parts of Europe will be affected because this is a huge plant. We are told it's the biggest in Europe, and it's built on old technology, so there might be difficulty with even containing the outflow if there is a problem there. What military strategy could there possibly be for leverage using this plant?
I think you're very correct. You know, this is, has been termed, you know, as one of Europe's biggest nuclear plant. And there are huge concerns that, you know, there's a possibility that it could be targeted by Russian shelling. Now, of course, this is from the Ukrainian and Western perspective. And if that were to happen, you know, then what we could face again is an increase in the crisis, that we're already experiencing in terms of the global impact of fuel, the global impact of gas, the skyrocketing prices. This is a major concern, and the Ukrainians are saying that they are very concerned that Russia could target this plan. But as you said, the impact is not just going to be on Ukraine. It is, of course, going to have a serious impact in Europe. We're already experiencing some fears that we will have what some have termed the winter of discontent, in the sense that there will be blackouts in Europe due to the shortage of gas, and that is huge. But remember, we are on the 6th month of this crisis, and we still do not have any end in sight. What we continuously see are threats of further destabilization of Ukraine, threats of further, targeting of, a serious, nuclear, plants within Ukraine, but also concerns that since Europe continuously supports the Ukrainian government, Ukraine is also, kind of digging in its heels, to ensure that it continuously puts up to what the Russians termed a special military operation. So, it's a big, big concern, for all sides, especially, Ukraine just announced that, not announced, but it did mention to the US, to Turkey, to France and the UK, that it will be celebrating its 31st independent anniversary from the former Soviet Union on Wednesday, which is the 24th. It's concerned that Russia is going to then want to do something significant, to affect this celebration of its independence. So the conflict, it's quite deep. It's not just the the fears of targeting of the nuclear plant, but the overall military and so-called propaganda strategies which have been deployed by both sides. It's a huge concern, to be honest.
Let's look at the conflict now, the conflict itself. It appears as if Ukraine is now on the offensive, and that the Russians and some international experts like yourself have said is due to the equipment that it has received from the West, in particular the multiple, what is referred to as HIMARS, the multiple rocket systems which enable it, and drones, which enable it to go much further than its troops would probably be able to do on land. Now, there have been several attacks in Crimea, as well as other places in Russia. Do you think this is having a potential of possibly expanding this conflict? Because prior to now, it had been mostly contained within Ukraine, but now there are problems within Russia itself and within the areas Russia thought it had taken over from Ukraine.
What we've got to be very clear about is that, there's still a disproportionate military battle taking place in Ukraine, especially in the east and the south, where the Donbass and the Luhansk, the Donetsk and Luhansk region. But of course, there is still some airstrikes being carried out by Ukraine itself on the former Ukrainian territory now annexed by Russia, Crimea. But again, I still doubt that Ukraine does have the capacity to launch a full-scale offensive, against Russia, despite what you mentioned, that the West continuously, gives Russia weapons and, finances the war. But so far, the West has refused, at least publicly, to give Ukraine heavy weaponry. But what we see here is that, the reason why this war keeps dragging on, and I'm not saying that, the West shouldn't support Ukraine, is because Ukraine depends hugely on the support of its Western allies, the US, NATO allies. And the reason why Russia also, as he says, you don't have to believe them, that it continuously, pounds its aerial and ground forces upon Ukraine is because they say that, NATO is indirectly, or in some instances directly, involved in the crisis. So it's a very challenging situation, and that's why I think that we don't have any winner in sight, because both sides continuously digging their heels. Ukraine believes that it cannot stop the war because, of course, it has territories that has been taken over by Russia. Russia also believes that it cannot stop the war because NATO forces or NATO allies are getting very close to consolidating their presence in Ukraine, which of course Russia calls its long-term territory. So it's a very challenging situation at this point in time. Turkey, President Erdogan has tried his best, to bring both sides on the negotiation table, but we haven't seen any, some kind of a promise, some kind of a glimpse of hope that President Zelensky of Ukraine and President Vladimir Putin of Russia will finally meet, to talk about serious terms, besides the negotiations, that were done by the UN to alleviate some of the blockages, around the Red Sea. So it's a very challenging state as we are. But 6 months into the war, it's still very concerning that we do not yet see any end in sight.
China and India seem to have come a bit more into this conflict as players. And what I mean by that is that, of course, Nancy Pelosi and a second congressional delegation went to Taiwan, in spite of the fact that China said it would be very, very displeased and it would react very strongly if she did and if the delegations did. But nevertheless, they went. Now, in the aftermath of that, we all saw what China did in the Taiwan Straits. Now, after that, you had a situation where the United States promised it would join India in military exercises along the disputed border with China. On the other hand, China says it will join Russia in military exercises within Russia, which are due to take place, I believe, sometime next month. So again, are we seeing, unconsciously perhaps, a widening of this conflict with some of the players that had remained on the fringes, if you like, coming out more fully? And is there, therefore, a possibility that we could be headed for more wide-ranging conflict?
We're already seeing, pockets of alliances, being established, as you rightly said. The U.S. is willing to win over India, which, of course, India has been, somehow sitting on the fence, when it came to when it comes to Russia's, invasion of Ukraine. Of course, the situation with China is some kind of an extension of the geopolitical, spheres of influence. China sees Taiwan as part of China. Taiwan doesn't agree with that, and it has, the U.S. to back it. What you saw in terms of that defiance, by Nancy Pelosi to travel to Taiwan, despite China saying, we're warning you not to. It's again, another line. I don't know if it's a red line or if it's a white line, but it's a line that China has promised it will retaliate. Perhaps, I think what we could see is China retaliating already. We've seen some of the what they call live exercises, that have taken place. But there could be other possible economic sanctions, that China, possibly would be preparing, because of course China has to show that it says or it does what it says, because if not, then the U.S. will then regard that as some kind of an empty threat. So it's quite disturbing to see that these pockets of alliances have been established, one side supporting the other. We've also seen the Russian foreign minister going from one African country to another, pickpocketing some of the influences that the West had previously had, and trying to showcase itself, reminding these African nations that we've been there for you, previously during the imperial days. We want you to remain neutral. The West has also done the same. The U.S. Secretary of State, has been visiting some African country. We saw Emmanuel Macron, traveling to Africa to talk about the fact that most African countries, have been hypocrites, because, you know, they fail to support the West when the West needs them most. So it's a battle of, you know, hearts and minds in terms of winning allies and, kind of trying to position, you know, themselves in a way that it's in fact, you know, not beneficial to the global people, because of course, you know, there is this need that, you know, one must support either Ukraine or Russia in this war, which of course I find very disturbing. But you know, in practice, you know, I think we get into a very dangerous point. There is little focus, you know, I have to add, on resolving the conflict itself. What you see is a rush to build alliances, and that is very dangerous, as we've seen, you know, during the First and the Second World Wars. We do not have, that atmosphere in the 21st century to, you know, bring up another escalation of a crisis that is already devastating in terms of its economic impact.
We don't indeed, David. We do not, and one can expect that this is what is likely to continue, especially as both sides dig in without thought to ending the conflict. We only hope that someone somewhere, someone big enough, someone trusted by both sides, is able to step to the plate and help to bring them to the table. Thank you so much, David Otter, from the British capital this morning.
Thank you.
The United Nations is lauding the ongoing Ukraine-Russia grain deal as ships dock and implementation continues. Over the weekend, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited a grain ship anchored off Istanbul's coast. After inspecting the ship, Invisible 2, Mr. Guterres also visited the Istanbul-based Joint Coordination Center and was briefed by officials about the process. All grain ships heading to and leaving Ukraine are subjected to security inspection off Istanbul's coast by officials from the Joint Coordination Center. The UN chief's Istanbul visit came 2 days after his trilateral meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Lviv. While in Istanbul, Mr. Guterres said the United Nations is working with the United States and European Union to overcome obstacles to Russian food and fertilizers reaching world markets. The UN Secretary General said that under a UN-brokered deal agreed to in Turkey last month to resume Ukraine's grain exports caught up since Russia's invasion, more than 650,000 metric tons of grain and other food was already being exported. He said those countries that imposed sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine had made clear that the measures did not apply to food and fertilizers, but added that there had nevertheless been a chilling effect on exports.
It is important that all governments and the private sector cooperate, bringing them to market. Without fertilizer in 2022, there may not be enough food in 2023. Getting more food and fertilizer out of Ukraine and Russia is critical to further calm commodity markets and lower prices for consumers. It has been made clear by the countries that have applied sanctions that they do not apply to food and fertilizers. But of course, there is a chilling effect in the private sector, and there are a certain number of obstacles and difficulties that need to be overcome in relation to shipping, in relation to insurance, and in relation to finance. And I can tell you that we are working hard in order, in cooperation with the US and the EU, in order to be able to make those obstacles being removed and to allow for what we consider is extremely important for the people, especially in the developing countries.
Russia is developing its own financial information transmission system for a transition from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications SWIFT payment system. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankin says the new system is to be protected from external pressure and facilitate Russian banks and their clients conduct international payments. The diplomat adds that some countries initiated or participated in freezing Russian assets, but it only caused unmeasurable and irreparable damage to their own commercial credibility. He said the action demonstrated to the world what is the true meaning of the so-called rule-based international order championed by the U.S. and some other Western countries. Many countries had noted Western sanctions on Russia were illegal and were considering de-dollarization in order to safeguard their sovereignty, stressing that Russia reserves the right to take special measures in response to further sanctions from the West, and that his country has been prepared for the escalation of the situation. Let's talk now to Ini John Amekwa, who joins us from the business desk. Morning to you, Ini. A key Russian natural gas pipeline was shut down for 3 days of maintenance.
Yes, once again, it's another maintenance. And this is just about a month since the last one. Remember that we were expecting the turbine to come from Canada and others. So this is going to be from 31st, 1st, and the 2nd of September. And of course, Germany is still suspicious about this, but it doesn't look like they have a lot of choice.
Right.
If the owners of the infrastructure say it needs maintenance and it needs to be shut down, then it has to be shut down. So I guess this is just one way of Russia preparing European countries for
the winning
end of the
off.
year.
Since they say they are going to win off.
Since you say
anyway.
you want to win off, you might as well start getting used to it. But of course, it is putting a lot of pressure already. It's supposed to start on the 31st, but of course, it's putting a lot of pressure already. Last week, we had the price of natural gas at really high. This morning, it tapered, but we don't know with this now
if it will go back up.
If it will go back up. And of course, once it goes back up, energy prices skyrocket, and then we see the threat of inflation and recession everywhere, especially in the European countries who depend solely on Russia for energy.
President Zelensky has announced his government's plans to launch large-scale privatization beginning on September the 1st.
Beginning on September. You know, this is kind of controversial, but I mean, President Zelensky has his own thoughts. He started this like in 2018, 2019, where he has tried to privatize a huge part of the economy because presently the states, the government of Ukraine owns about 50% of the banking sector. You know, and they run over 3,000 enterprises of companies. That means they control a huge part of employment.
Right.
So that puts a lot of pressure on the government. So President Zelensky has before now tried to privatize, sell some of the land to, you know, people who can afford it, so that part of the economy is run by the private sector. But it was a lot of controversy in 2019, 2021. But now, in the midst of the war, I think the president is bringing it back, and he doesn't seem to have a lot of resistance at this time because people are distracted. I think how many thousands of Ukrainians are refugees in other countries?
Millions, actually.
Exactly, millions, exactly, you know, are outside the country. So he's now bringing it back. And well, he's excused now, among other things, apart from reducing the burden on the state, he's saying that they need the money. So they need private sector to come and buy, you know, some of this private, especially land. They really want to sell land. And they say they want to sell it to Ukrainians. If foreigners want to buy, they have to go through Ukrainians. So it's not like they want to sell their country to outsiders, but they want Ukrainians to own land, to own properties.
And to own it, of course, in terms of private sector.
Yeah, in terms of the private sector, yes. In terms of the private sector, to run it. I mean, imagine 50% of the banking sector being controlled by the government. You know,
and now a government at war.
And the government at war. How do they fund it? How do they pay those people? How do they run the system? So that's his thought. I mean, but I mean, let's not use the war because he started this long before now.
I guess it's been brought forward because the circumstances have changed.
Yes, have changed and all of that. And well, he's also particular about this because some people are suspecting, okay, the IMF is in support of this. The European countries and EU is in support of this because they do believe that government shouldn't control things that much. But some people are saying that the level of unemployment that will come out of, because obviously, if the government was running a bank, they could employ maybe like 20 people. When the private sector takes it over, they want one person to do 5 people's job.
And,
so there's a lot of
to make more.
Exactly.
A lot more efficiency and therefore a lot more unemployment and a
Yes, that
spiral-on
is the fear
effect.
of a lot of people, that a lot of people will be left unemployed when this happens. But I guess he's looking at the long run and efficiency and all of that. And they've placed a banner that it's not all of the assets that will be sold. It's an asset, you know, I think about, it will not cost more than $1,000 or something like that, you know, just to wedge it so that you don't have the bourgeoisie come and take over
the oligarchs who come and take it over.
Oligarchs come and take over the country.
Indeed. Speaking about the IMF, there's a request for changes to their surcharges.
Yes. So, you know, there are surcharges. There's the IMF surcharges. A country that is highly indebted has to pay some amount of money, and that's supposed to discourage countries from owing and going to the IMF every time. You know, we do know, of course, if you go to the Chinese government, you know, some of the things that happened to Sri Lanka and Zimbabwe and some of those other countries.
Right.
So that people do not take that for granted, that's why there's the surcharges. But now there's discussion as to a lot of countries are in very bad shape at this time. Ukraine, top on that list. I think Ukraine is owing about how much now? They're really owing at this time in SDR. If I can just get that out, they're owing a huge amount of money at this time. So they're talking about at least suspending. No, I think the U.S. has sat down, because the U.S. is the highest shareholder in IMF, so they can actually sit down. This is one of the problems that Russia has.
Yeah, and say, look, this is what's going to happen, and
yes,
that's it.
And that's one of the problems that that's why Russia has this swift alternative now that
which it is pursuing. I agree.
You know, so the U.S. had sat down, the Senate and all that, they sat down and they suspended that surcharge while they contemplate on what they're going to do about it. So it's just to help countries, so that countries do not have so much to pay, because as it is now, a country like Ukraine is owing billions in dollars, and they say by 2023, of course, it will be worse. They're owing from SDR, they're owing from what they have gotten since the war started, even before the war started, and then you have countries like Sri Lanka who cannot even take care of
there's nowhere to even begin.
Exactly. So, and then you'd say, okay, because they're highly indebted, then they're going to have surcharges. Where are they going to get that to pay from? Thank God Nigeria is not there. But I mean, our level of debt stock now is really high. Our revenue cannot cover our debt servicing. So Nigeria,
we have,
of course,
similar problems.
You know what I'm saying. So, I mean, it will also pay a lot of people. But they are talking of suspending it for now while they think of a better way to do it, so that countries do not just relax and feel they can go to the IMF and get whatever they want at any time, but also to help countries who are already indebted at this time and they have difficulties. A lot, I mean, every country at this time
has some level of difficulty.
Yes.
You're absolutely correct, Ini. Thank you so much, Ini. Updates of these and the other business stories will come up right after this show at 10. Ini and Laddie Williams will be joining us at that time with the updates. Of course, later on in the afternoon, there'll be updates from Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the markets in particular. Ini will also be around alongside Laddie to unfold that. Thank you for now.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look at some of the other news happening at this time. The Albania said it is investigating why 2 Russians and a Ukrainian had tried to enter a military factory. The defense ministry revealed that 2 of its soldiers had been slightly injured while detaining a 24-year-old man from Russia who had entered the grounds of the Gramsh military factory and was trying to take photos. He resisted arrest and used spray against the soldiers. 2 others, a 33-year-old Russian woman and a Ukrainian man aged 25-old, were arrested nearby. Defense Minister Niko Peleshi has visited the injured soldiers in hospital and says it is too early to be sure about the motive, but referred to geopolitics, apparently indicating a possible link to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has been criticized by the government of Albania. For Ukrainian soldier Dmytro Divchenko, embracing his family back in Poland after 6 months on the front line has a special poignancy as he tries to clear his mind of the images of war. One of the thousands of soldiers thought to have come from abroad to fight in Ukraine, the 41-year-old, who has also seen action in the south near Kherson, can now savor the simple daily activities he has been missing since last February. He fought against Russian troops in the eastern Donbas region in 2014, the year that Moscow annexed Crimea from Ukraine. But this time the conflict, according to him, is more brutal. With no sign of a let-up in the Russian advance and the Ukrainian army outgunned, Mr. Dovzhenko has little patience for Western voices that express concern at the course of the war but are offering no tangible help. He said he had come across the corpses in Irpin in early March as his unit fought to liberate the Kyiv suburb from Russian forces.
There used to be a battle line. We knew the enemy is on this side, our country on the other side. There was some sort of line. Now there's no such line. And all of the same brackets, the same shots, everything that Russia is using now wasn't there before. The United Nations, they did nothing. They need our corn, but they did nothing for our country. Everyone is concerned. Great, someone is concerned, and we have rockets on our heads. If you're so concerned, we can switch spots. I invite them to Kyiv or Mykolaiv. Their concern will be very much needed there. We just don't have enough weapons right now. We need a lot of weapons. We need a lot of artillery. We need reactive systems, and we need new handguns for the infantry.
And finally on the program, Ukrainian heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk has dedicated his victory to Ukraine after beating Anthony Joshua. This rematch had been delayed following Russia's invasion of his country in February. He's now calling for an undisputed heavyweight world championship clash with Tyson Fury after retaining his WBO, WBA and IBF titles with a spectacular split decision rematch victory over Joshua. Usyk delivered a boxing masterclass in Jeddah on Saturday night to repeat last year's victory over two-time world champion Joshua, who put up a courageous and improved display against the Ukrainian. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiri-Duluale. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. For now, do have yourselves a good Monday ahead. Good morning.